Okay, we are going to continue our series on Christian evidences. And tonight's lesson may seem more like a science lesson than it does a worship service lesson. But I think it can give us some confidence to know that the Bible is true, that the Bible account of creation is the correct way to think and the correct thing to believe other than evolution. I've kindly entitled this series, "And God Said," because it begins with, "And God said, let there be light." And so as we think about this, to give us confidence and assurance, one of the passages that I want us to think about is Romans chapter 1, verse 20. Romans chapter 1, verse 20 says, "For since the creation of the world, His invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even His eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." And what he's saying there, we say that God's fingerprints are all around. And we can look out into nature and we can look out into the universe and look actually too within ourselves and see God's handiwork. And here Paul is telling those in Rome and us as well that by even nature itself, you can see that God exists. And so we're going to talk about a few of these things tonight and look at some of these things and look at the ideal of creation. Now, last Sunday night we talked about the 6 days of creation. But I want to go back a little bit and look at what science says. Science's theory, for the most part, is the Big Bang Theory. 4.5 billion years ago, there was an explosion, and all things then from that point on came into being. I want to read you and show you the brief definition of the Big Bang Theory. And this is off of the internet. It's not something I wrote, it's something off the internet. And it says around 13.7 billion years ago, everything in the entire universe was condensed in an infinitesimally small singularity, a point of infinite denseness and heat. Suddenly, an expansion began, ballooning our universe outward faster than the speed of light. Now I want to go back and I want you to listen to what that's saying. An infinitesimally small, infinitely dense and heat. Now I want to look at the two definitions of infinite. Infinite means limitless or endless in space, extent or size, impossible to measure or calculate. So something that you can't measure, something that you can't even calculate its size. And sometimes when we use the word infinite in regards to space, it's so huge and so large we can't understand it. We can't measure. We don't know how big it is. But now, and what they're saying is this core that started the universe was infinite density and infinite heat. Something that was beyond measure. But then in their explanation, it says infinitesimally small. Now, listen to that definition. In common speech, an infinitesimal object is an object that is smaller than any feasible measurement. Smaller than any feasible measurement, but not zero in size, or so small it cannot be distinguished from zero by any available means. So what are they saying right there? That what the universe came from was a glob so small that you couldn't tell the difference between it and nothing. That's what that's saying. And if I'm wrong, I mean, somebody correct me, but that's what that's saying. It is so small, you can't distinguish it from zero. And then from all of that, from that little bitty microscopic, unable to see, unable to measure, there was the explosion, and then all the universe came into being from that. Now, folks, I am not too bright, but to me that makes no sense. You know, yeah, they talk about it being dense and a lot of heat, but still at the same time, how can there be that much volume in something that you can't distinguish from zero? That's the evolutionist theory of how the world came about. Christians believe, as we talked about last Sunday night, on day one, God said, He created the heavens and the earth and created light. He spoke it into existence. On day two, He created the seas and the skies. On day three, the land and the plants. And day four, the sun, the moon, and the stars. He spoke those things into existence. On day five, the fish and the birds and the creatures that came out of the sea. And on day six, created the land animals as well as man. A designer, God, spoke the universe into existence. Now, which one to you, and I want you to set aside for a moment your Christian beliefs. Okay, let's just set those aside for a moment. As a person who has a mind and reasoning capabilities, which sounds more logical to you? That the earth, the universe, and all things that exist, which includes the celestial bodies in space, came from nothing through an explosion, or came by the voice of an almighty being that spoke things into existence. To me, God speaking things into existence makes more sense. There are examples of all kinds of creation, or examples of God, and we can see in the universe, the complexity of our bodies, the complexity of the universe. You know, if the earth was tilted on its axis, you know, a half a degree more one way or the other, the earth would not be inhabitable. Everything is just exactly as it needs to be in order for the earth to be inhabitable. Now, as we think about that, let's look at how old the earth is. Scientists will tell you that it's about 4 billion years old. It came about after that explosion several billion years later. It evolved and then began to prepare itself for human beings. In creation, the earth is a young earth. Not 4.5 billion years old. It's only a few thousand years old. You go back in the Bible and you look at the Bible and you look at the genealogies that are in the Old Testament. You can look at the genealogies in the New Testament, and you can somewhat calculate the age of the earth. Creation to the flood is about 1,656 years, give or take a few years, because a couple of those in the genealogies are a little bit unclear as to how long they lived. Then from the flood to Abraham, that again is a little bit unclear. Some estimate it to be 400 years. Some estimate it to be as high as 5,000 years. As I went through and read, I guessed it between 1,600 and 2,000 years. And you can go through and make your best guess at that if you would like to do that. And then from Abraham to Christ is about 2,000 years. And then from Christ to date, we're pushing 2,000 years, which is going to put the earth somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. Well, some people might say, well, David, geology is going to tell you totally different. That, we can, use dating, and we can carbon date all of these different rocks and all these different things and get age after age after age. But let me have you think about something. One of the theories is that the stars and the light that travels from a star to get to the earth, or they are hundreds and thousands of light years away. And so, well, it had to take that many years for the light to get here. Well, if God created Adam as a full-grown human being, God could create the light already here without any problem. And we need that light for this planet to be inhabitable. So again, that doesn't threaten me at all, the speed of light and the distance that stars have to travel. But as we look at that, and we can see that the 6,000 to 10,000 year old earth, to me, is very plausible. Now, another thing I want us to think about as we go through this, a term that you will come up on if you study much about evolution: uniformitarianism. And I think I may have mispronounced that, but what that means is, as things change on the earth and as things break down, they do it in a constant rate. So if something is deteriorating, it does it at a constant rate. It doesn't speed up and it doesn't slow down. And that's something that is taught by evolutionists. Now, I want you to keep that in mind, because that's important to think about. We have a moon that is close to our planet compared to the universe. It's about 98,000 miles, something like that, from the earth. Do you know that the moon is slowly moving away from the earth? It's moving away from the earth about an inch per year. An inch per year. If you go back to the time of Christ, the earth would have been about 750 feet closer to the earth than it is today. But if you go back, continue going back in time to 1,000,000 years, 2,000,000 years, 3,000,000 years, when man was supposedly first forming on earth, the moon would have been brushing the earth. Now, I don't know what that tells you, but to me, now you have to go back to that uniformitarianism, because they will say, well, in the past it wasn't moving away as fast. But now continue to think about that. The explosion, what happens when something explodes, when objects get away from that explosion? What do? Do they speed up? They slow down, don't they? So then the moon would have been moving away faster earlier in history, according to evolutionists, if that's the case. And so the moon would have even been closer than brushing the earth. So again, to me, that does not make sense. Our sun is also moving away at 2.2 3/8 inches roughly a year. Our sun is also shrinking. And it shrinks about 5 feet per 10 years. Let's reverse that math and see what happens. You go back when man was supposedly being formed on earth. The sun would have engulfed the earth. The earth would have been inside the sun when life was supposed to be evolving on earth. Now, as creationists, if God created it, let's say 8,000 years ago, mathematically, it's right where it should be, and still able to sustain life here on earth. Which to me tells me that the earth is young. Some more mathematical stuff. The population of the earth is about 8 million people. As of January 1 of this year, according to the census, world population is 8,019,876,189. 8,019,876,189 population of the world. Now, you remember Wednesday night I said something about 10 to the 2,000th power? If man has existed for 3 million years on earth, and if you take the average number of children born to a couple, and you go back 1 million years, the number of people on the earth would be 10 to the 2,000th power. Now that number that you see on the very bottom is 10 to the 20th power. Because to write 10 to the 2,000th power, it would be 1 followed by 2,000 zeros. I have no idea how to even say that number. And that's only going back 1 million years. And some will say, well, the population grew and then it died and then it come again and it died. But there's no evidence of that. That's all assumption. That's all trying to make something that does not make sense to make sense. Now, let's look at the Bible timeline. If humans have been on earth since the flood, 4,350 years ago, since the flood, if that's how long it's been. Using that same mathematical calculation, and you can go on Apologetic Express, and you can look down, and they will show you the formula that they used to arrive at this number. The estimated population would be 7.5 billion people on earth. How close is that to 8 billion, 19 million, and so on? Which one makes more sense? Which one is more logical? The thought would be that this planet could sustain about 50 billion people. Ten to the 20th power, that many people on earth would be standing shoulder to shoulder around the globe. So which one makes more sense to you? Which one sounds more logical? Which one is comparative to the facts? And I think that's what we're needing to look at here. I want to give you some more stuff that's kindly mind-boggling to me. There is a bacterium that has been found supposedly in ancient dinosaur bone. They call it the Lazarus bacterium because once it was rehydrated, it came back to life as a bacterium. Supposedly, this bacterium is billions of years old. How in the world could it survive that many millions of years? Also think about T-Rex. T-Rex is a dinosaur. Inside bones of fossilized bones of a dinosaur, they have found soft tissue, which included blood vessels and some fragments of skin. Supposedly 65 million years old. You tell me how long soft tissue could survive for that long. Again, to me, that just does not make sense. Now, perhaps it's not as old as they think it is. Perhaps it's quite a bit younger. Perhaps it's only a few thousand years old. Well, then you get into the issue of saying, well, some people say, well, man and dinosaur never existed together. Folks, I'm not going to try to fool you and tell you dinosaurs did not exist. I believe they existed. But I believe man existed right along beside them. All dinosaurs, when you think of dinosaur, what do you think of? You think of a gigantic creature. And yes, some of them were large. Some of them were very large. But the majority of the dinosaurs were small. Chicken size, bird size, dog size, cow size. And you think, well, these gigantic dinosaurs that weighed, some suggest that some weighed as much as 100 tons. Well, we have creatures on the earth today. The blue whale can weigh as much as 200 to 300,000 pounds, 150 tons. So to me, that's not a concern. Now, let's look at humans and dinosaurs living together. What proof is there that man and dinosaur existed together if we don't look at the Bible? Is there any proof that man and dinosaur existed together? Scientists say that we are separated from dinosaurs by 65 million years. Dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago, and then here we are today, never having seen them. Look at Job 41. Job 41 talks about the Leviathan. And we can see from the description there in Job chapter 41 of Leviathan, and it's not a hippopotamus, it's not an ox, but that description there in Job 41 sounds to me like a dinosaur. Also, the behemoth in chapter 40, we talk about that he too sounds more like a dinosaur than a hippopotamus. And that was something that Job was familiar with. Otherwise, why would God have said to him, Job, can you draw out Leviathan? Can you defeat Behemoth? Because if Job wasn't understanding what these creatures were, how would this have been accomplished? How would Job have known what God was talking about? Well, let's look at some other things. This is what scientists tell you that man has come from. Started from a non-human and evolved into a human. And that we never existed with dinosaurs. In Utah, in Colorado, in several states out west, there are caves that have drawings on them. And these drawings are pre-fossil discovery. And what do you see in those pictures? You see men supposedly looking like hunting dinosaurs. How would they have known what these dinosaurs look like to be able to draw a picture that accurate? And folks, there's not just one picture, there's several. And I don't have them all on this slide, but there are several drawings of dinosaurs that were made by men. The first fossil was found, I think, in 1867. And all of these are drawings that were prior to that date. Some other evidence that the earth is young. It's an Alka-Seltzer in a glass. And you're looking at me like, David, you've lost your mind. You know what happens when you drop an Alka-Seltzer into a bottle of water. What happens? It dissolves in a matter of minutes. Suppose you found this glass with that Alka-Seltzer tablet in it, at that stage, frozen solid. What would you think? It froze quickly. It froze very quickly in a matter of minutes. That ice formed around that tablet, and those bubbles were frozen in the middle of that water. That's the only conclusion that you could come to. There are some radio halos in granite. Granite is the bedrock. These radio halos is radiation that is escaping and moving through this granite as it forms. These radio halos have a half-life of 3 minutes. So that means they exist for 6 minutes. But yet they are formed up through granite. What does that tell you about granite? That it formed over millions and millions of years? Or it formed very quickly, very rapidly, as God spoke it into existence? To me, I go back to the Alka-Seltzer. If I find a glass of Alka-Seltzer frozen and all the bubbles are in the middle, and then I compare that to that, what other conclusion can I come to? Human remains. One scientist said all of the human remains that have been fossilized could be placed in a single coffin. All the human fossils that have been found could be placed in a single coffin and still have room to spare. It's not very many, is it? Because the bones decay. It takes very special conditions for a bone to fossilize. It takes rapid covering by certain types of sediment. And so the amount of human remains, you may think there are, from what you see on in books and on television, that there's just an endless supply of human fossilized bones. There's not. Most of what you see are reproductions, and they fill in the gaps. For many years, and I can't remember the name of the dinosaur, but they had one head on a dinosaur that they had found from the body, and it was about 5 miles apart. So they said, well, this head must go with this dinosaur. Later, they did find that one dinosaur skeleton intact, and they had the wrong head on it. So again, there are those things there that, there are some human remains. And if you go back and look at the human remains that they have and the skulls that they have, the majority of them look very similar. And to me, they look very similar to those of today. Now, there will be some thrown in there that look more like a chimpanzee or a monkey or a gorilla. And to me, in my book, that's what it is. For they are using that as the head of a human being. Now, a couple other things, and we're going to pick up next Sunday, or be the following Sunday. But the great unconformity, and I don't know if you can see it or not, but the darker white line toward the bottom, the dark line toward the bottom. Everything above that line is laid down in layers, like sediment laid by water. The section below that line is solid, no layers, solid rock. That's what God created. And that sediment that's above that, I think, is what the flood laid down. Because the evidence shows that the majority of those layers were laid down rapidly. Not over millions of years, but laid down rapidly. Because in some places, there are trees that have grown through more than one layer. So you tell me how that happened over millions and millions of years. Here is a slide that you might be able to see that a little more clearly. The layers are above, from the man's hand above are the layers, and below is the great unconformity. And it gets its title because scientists have a difficult time explaining why it's there, why it's not in layers as well. But if you consider the Bible's timeline being a young earth, then to me it makes sense. There's also evidence that the earth was at one time covered by water. On Mount Everest, there are fossils of fish on Mount Everest. Not flying fish, but fish. What does that tell you? Somehow or other, that fish got up there. It had to be covered by water, which falls right into the account of the Bible. Not only on Mount Everest, but on the Rocky Mountains, there are fossilized fish. Some say that this fish, this fossil of this fish, that this fish doesn't seem to, may have died of starvation. But folks, to me, it looks like he's eating another fish. What does that tell me? That fish died rapidly. It was buried rapidly in some catastrophe. I would contend it's the flood. Where all the things, and we're going to talk about the flood down the road a little bit, and all the things that occurred during the flood. But this is evidence of the young earth and the flood. And here's another picture of fish, fossilized fish in the Rocky Mountains. Now you take all this evidence and put it together. And I encourage you to do your own research if you have doubts, if you have concerns. Do your own research. Look at this stuff and study it and see if it doesn't help you to become a stronger Christian and believe more in the fact of creation. And give you evidence when you are confronted by someone that says the earth is billions of years old and that the earth is formed from an explosion. And remember, have you ever seen an explosion that put things together? I've never seen an explosion that put things together. Every time I've seen an explosion, it has destroyed whatever was exploding. This gives me more confidence, more assurance, and I hope it does you as well. Like I said at the beginning, this has been more like a science lesson than a Bible lesson, but I think it gives us the confidence that we can face and we can have confidence in our faith and in our belief in God. If you're here tonight and you're not a child of God, you have a desire to become a Christian, we can assist you in that. Like Ananias told Paul, "Why tarriest thou? Arise and be baptized and wash away your sins, calling on the name of the Lord." But if you've done that and you've fallen away and you need prayer as your brothers and sisters in Christ, we will pray with you and pray for you. And God has promised that He will forgive you. If we can assist you in any way tonight, we encourage you to come while we stand and while we sing.